The teacher asked us to use evidence in a sentence. Then Johnny stood up. Have you ever had a classmate who could turn the most innocent question into a complete disaster? Our English teacher, Mrs. Carter, had this one activity she loved. She'd write random vocabulary words on the board and make us use each one in a sentence. Most of us hated it because if you took too long, the entire class would stare at you like you were being interrogated. That day, everything was going normally. Sarah used fortunate. I was fortunate enough to find my lost phone. Then Jake used determined. I was determined to finish my homework before dinner. A few more students answered. Then Mrs. Carter wrote one final word on the board. Evidence. She turned around. All right, who can use evidence in a sentence? Nobody said anything. She waited. Then she looked directly at Johnny. If you don't know Johnny, he was basically the human version of a bad idea. This was the same kid who once convinced half the class that the principal had a secret tunnel underneath the school. He had absolutely no evidence, but somehow 20 kids spent lunch looking for it. Mrs. Carter sighed. Johnny, why don't you give it a try? Johnny stood up. He looked at the word. Then he looked around the classroom and smiled. Okay, he paused dramatically. My mom found evidence that I ate the cookies last night. Mrs. Carter smiled. Excellent, Johnny. And what was the evidence? Johnny shrugged. She found the empty cookie jar. The class laughed. Mrs. Carter nodded. Good. That's exactly how you use the word. Johnny wasn't finished. He raised one finger. There's actually more evidence. Mrs. Carter looked confused. More? Johnny nodded. Yeah, he pointed at himself. She also found chocolate on my face. Everyone started laughing again. Mrs. Carter tried not to smile. Okay, Johnny, sit down. Johnny sat. Then he suddenly raised his hand again. Mrs. Carter looked terrified. What? Johnny said. My mom also found evidence that my little brother ate the cookies. The room went quiet. Mrs. Carter asked, how? Johnny smiled. He had chocolate on his face too. Mrs. Carter nodded. Then how did your mother know you ate them? Johnny looked completely serious. Because I had the jar. The entire class lost it. Bro! Mrs. Carter covered her face. Johnny, please sit down. He sat down. Then the kid next to me whispered, honestly, that's pretty solid evidence. Johnny looked at him. Thank you. Bro! And that's how Johnny turned a vocabulary exercise into a full criminal investigation over a cookie jar.